Welcome to episode 175 of the Left Behind Game Club. This week, we continue our two-part Final Fantasy XVI series. Let's get right into it.
You're listening to the Left Behind Game Club.
Welcome to the Left Behind Game Club, our never-ending attempt to make sure that no game is left behind. I'm your host, Jacob McCourt, and today I have three friends with me. The first friend, you know her, you love her. Her name is Katie Lesbrunts.
Hello, we're back.
We're back with our second friend, Flora Marigold.
I accept the truth.
And our third friend, back for the second time on the show, from Tales from the Backlog, it's Dave Jackson. Dave, hello.
Thank you. Feels like I never left.
Secrets, you didn't. But we're back for Final Fantasy XVI Part 2. If you haven't listened to Part 1, please go back to episode 174 that came out 2 weeks ago where we talked about it. We talked about setting up the world, some of our complaints about the side quests, and more. Today we're going to chat through some of the big story beats, some of our favorite characters. We've got a lot of questions from the audience and from y'all in the Discord. Thank you. And maybe I'll tell a Ben Starr story because that's who I am as a human being. Should we start and talk about the characters? Because I feel like there are some characters in part 1 that we had not spoken about at all. Somehow we missed talking about Jill Warwick completely. So I'm going to start with a question. It's from Alias X. The question is, who are your favorite and least favorite characters?
Is it weird if I say Hugo and Benedicta?
No, not at all. Please elaborate.
I don't know. There were some of the few characters when they were on screen, I'm like, oh, they could say or do anything. And I was like, here for it. Whereas almost everyone else kind of had their lane and more or less stayed in it. And I kind of knew what Jill was going to say. I liked Jill. I think Jill may be one of my favorite of the main party. But yeah, I think Hugo and Benedict are possibly my favorites.
I'm going to go ahead and say Clive is probably my favorite character, and maybe Sid also, although I have a real weird mental block where I know that Sid's voice actor did an incredible job, but I don't believe that that's the voice coming out of that man. So like the character, the render of Sid, the character. So despite that mental block, I thought Sid was cool. I would like to hang out with Sid. Jill is my least favorite character, like almost by a mile. I thought that I'm going to use a sports term here. It's going to sound derogatory, but I promise it's a sports term. Jill felt like a warm body to fill a role in scenes.
Yes.
Whereas you would expect arguably the second most important character, third most maybe behind Clive and Joshua, to do or say almost anything outside of like a 15-minute quest where she gets her revenge. She just kind of there and doesn't feel like she has any personality or role in the story other than to serve whatever's going on with Clive, including their love story. So yeah, Jill, worst character in my opinion. I thought she was bad.
I agree that she's the least fleshed out character of all of the main party. I think it speaks to more of how much I didn't care about the main party.
Thank you.
I did like
me
Clive
too.
though.
Yeah.
But
that's why I was like, my favorite's Clive, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I feel like Jill is this weird, like, pseudo Tifa Lockhart stand-in. Like, they're trying to, like, put in this, like, attractive woman character, but then they forgot to write her. And that's unfortunate, because the few scenes where she is written are actually, I think, kind of interesting. But my favorite character is Torgal.
He's a good boy.
Yeah.
It's a good boy.
Yeah.
I would tend to agree on the least favorite character, and again, it's all the writing. It is very much like the Bechdel test. Like Jill would likely not pass based on like everything that happens. I mean, she is essentially purchased or taken as a child and then becomes sort of a sister to Clive, at least when they're growing up, and then like essentially her whole story wraps around Clive's story. So I would say like writing wise, definitely my least favorite character. And then I have a lot of favorites. We've named some of them. But I think the one thing I definitely wanted to happen was I wanted Dion Lesage and Joshua to kiss for the entire game, and they didn't, and so I was really disappointed with that. Dion, in my mind, I appreciated that they just like didn't kill the queer character immediately, and really gave him like a very, I don't want to say valiant end, but like I think treated him with a lot of respect when they could have just like buried their gays, and they didn't, and I appreciated it, at least for most of the game. But there are so many excellent characters. Even some of the side characters you may be like, they're just throwaways. But some of the folks in the hideaway, like Lady Karen, was like a very cranky old lady that always had some great jokes. So a lot of fun characters in the game. So now that we've got that question out of the way, should we talk about some of the things we liked about the game? Because in the last episode, we basically trashed the game for a lot of the time, and I think we wouldn't be here and wouldn't have finished it if we didn't at least like it a little bit. So I'm going to challenge everyone to tell us one thing they liked about Final Fantasy XVI, starting with our guest, Dave. You can go first.
I thought the music was excellent. Loved it.
Yes.
And especially punctuating those big Eikon battles, it was incredible. But is this episode full spoilers too?
Full spoilers.
Okay.
We are going to spoil the heck out of Final Fantasy XVI, so pull the trigger, baby.
Okay, so after you destroy the last Mother Crystal, it's like the color gets drained out of the world, and they do this amazing visual palette change around the world. It really seems like, oh, you really screwed this up. This is bad. And the whole tone of the visuals and the music also changes to support that. And so you might have had like this kind of adventuring backing track in the earlier sections of the game when you're going through some of these open levels. But it is melancholy, sad music as you're going through the levels in the last third maybe of the game. And I thought that was excellent. I've never seen a game do that before, even though you do have, well, I guess that's not true. Final Fantasy VI does that. But I have not seen a game recently do something like that. And I thought it was a really nice touch to really sell how bad things are.
I feel like music was going to be my answer. So the other thing I will make sure to compliment about this game is the character costuming, like the actual design of what these characters look like and what they're wearing. I found to be incredibly striking, and there was never a moment of confusion between any of the main cast. No one looked out of place. No one felt out of place. And I think that the only thing that might have been out of place was Clive's buttons that kept bursting on his chest. Like, that's the only thing I can point to. Like they all just are stunning costumes. The other thing I will say is early on in the game, I want to say this is taking place during the demo. There is a battlefield sequence with a bunch of like swords being slung around, people in full suits of armor. And the animation that's present, it's a full cutscene. There's no interactivity or anything, so they can get away with this. But the individual animations happening on that screen, if you go back and look at that scene closely, is staggering. It's one of the most well and thoroughly animated scenes and sequences I've seen in a AAA game, maybe ever. It felt like it could have been filmed like in a Lord of the Rings like scene.
I echo everything that both of you said. All those things were on my list of like the big standout great things. I'll also say the environment art of every single big giant environment that you go to me was beautiful and had all these interesting architectural elements that made them unique. And everywhere we went to, I was like, oh my God, it's beautiful. As far as just the color and the lines and the angles that everything formed, it really felt like they let artists just go nuts and like make it as big as you want and just go crazy. Like just whatever you want to put into this game, throw it in there and make it your own. It was beautiful.
Yeah, and even though there were like, to echo your point, some like categories of stuff, like there was castles and there was a crystal dungeon, there were a lot of those. I felt like there was a lot of personality between each of them, even between the different kingdoms' castles. It was super fun to explore those, and you know, as much as tedious as it was sometimes to run up a giant spiral staircase, I still sort of loved it. And to that point, the thing I loved about it as sort of a not JRPG person, I mean, this year I've played probably more RPGs than I've ever played in my entire life. I appreciated that they always kept us on the critical path. There are a lot of games, having played Chrono Trigger, and I literally know it's not the same thing, but I just, as a point of comparison, Chrono Trigger very much is just like, here's the world and go, and sort of just figure it out. And sometimes it requires you to time travel where physical locations are different. But with this, it's very much like, there's a critical path. You will know what you're doing almost the entire time because the map's great. But beyond that, even having Torgal as an assist that can essentially, if you click the left stick, it will essentially point you in the direction of your main quest, was super helpful. And especially in the last couple of hours when my TV settings maybe weren't set the best for the very dark environments I was in, it was really helpful for me to have that so that I always knew where I was going and I never really got lost.
Should we talk about active time lore?
Yeah,
because,
fantastic.
Oh my God, especially
more games.
In this game in particular, I'm like, what a better game. Like in the year of 2023, what game, if you looked at the slate of games and said, which game would I want something like active time lore? It's this game where at any moment they're like, oh, and you betrayed so-and-so. And me, of course, who doesn't remember main characters' names, I go, excuse me, who? And I just hit start, or I hit, I don't know, 2 buttons.
Touchpad?
The touchpad. And then, I hit 2 buttons, which bring me straight to active time lore. And it pulls up basically like a handful of things that are relevant to what's happening. Either it is where we are and who's talking, or the place that they are referencing, or the people that they are referencing. And you can literally just go over there. And not only does it tell you what the character is, their motivations, it's updated in real time with where you are in the game. It's like, well, and this happened and they're mad about this. And it's for it to be so well done that it's not just, a character description that they put in at the start of the game and it's the same one throughout the whole thing. That would have also been helpful. But for it to be updated and for where that character is in the story at the present time, that's really cool. And I want it in more games.
It's the right way to do a codex.
Yes.
Tons of RPGs introduce proper nouns to you, and then they say, well, if you want to know what that is, go deep into the menu and read out of the codex. And I don't want to. And when I go in to read the codex, I've lost the context for the thing that I'm looking up, and it's just not ideal. So this actually feels like a direct result of my lightly researched development story of them, the whole team, watching Game of Thrones to like get inspiration. I lightly researched, I'm pretty sure that's true. But one of the things about Game of Thrones for everybody who has read or watched that show is that they throw a bunch of names and places at you at the beginning. And you're like, I don't know who the Tyrells are. How am I supposed to know that? This feels like a direct result of that, where they're like, you know what? People are going to want to know these places and names and families and icons and stuff like that. Let's figure out a way to teach people right there in that moment.
Yeah, and even like building past the active time lore, there's even resources in the world. I think the codec was really well done. The Harpocrates had essentially like a encyclopedia where you could find out every character, every location, and then as the game went, it would update and say and add information so that you would have multiple pages for a single character, for example, to go through. And even Vivian Ninetails, who is like the strategist. I don't know if y'all went into like her screen, but she essentially had like a battle map that would show the entire world and then the conflicts that happened between all of the different kingdoms. And you could go through the entire timeline and learn about each one of those individual conflicts. Again, I spent maybe 10 minutes looking at that stuff, but like wild that it was there, a lot of resources it took to put it in there. And I appreciated having it, even though I didn't spend tons of time in it.
So that makes me wonder how often y'all actually looked at the active time lore in the game while playing, because it struck me as an incredibly impressive feature, but I didn't use it. Dave?
Yeah, I agree. So like I praise its inclusion, and I used it a lot in the first half of the game when they're introducing all of these kings and queens and knights and places and stuff like that. I used it quite a bit. But then at a certain point, as we've talked about before, all that stuff gets left behind and it basically becomes a story about Clive and Ultima and Joshua. and none of that stuff really matters. In between those big scenes, I remember those like battle map scenes that Ninetales, I forget their name, shows you, but they're basically just like cutscenes in between main story missions. And I was like, I don't care. I know this is not important for the story of this game. I'm not paying attention. And similar to the active time lore, like you spend the last 10 hours of the game, like almost exclusively talking with Ultima and Dion and Joshua, and Barnabas is there, but I know them. There's like 4 characters. So yeah, I did fall off of using it for sure.
I didn't touch was it Hippocrates? I didn't touch his stuff. I didn't touch the battle map. Yeah. I did use active time lore. I think I probably pulled it up about 8 to 10 times through the game.
That's it?
I mean, yeah. And then when I was like really lost in what they were talking about, if there was like one little nugget that I was like, I don't know who that is, I would just let it go. But if it was like, wait, where am I? And I really needed like a reset, that's when I would pull it up. But like those 8 to 10 times, I feel like is a meaningful number of times. Mm-hmm. Probably used it like in like the last quarter of the game, probably like, I don't know, 2 or 3. But yeah, I know. I used it enough that I appreciated its inclusion.
I think for me, I used it at least very much like Dave, like the first half of the game, I used it more until it became a story about very few characters. But I probably used it at least once or twice an hour for the first 25 hours of the game. Because I'm dumb and I can't remember what characters are all about, and I cared.
See, I'm the opposite, where at the beginning, I was like, well, I don't know that yet, but I'll wait and see if they explain that to me. So I didn't use it as much at the beginning, and then more mid to late, that's when I used it more.
I also only used it maybe 8 times or so, if we're being generous. Like it was like a play around with it until I figure out how it worked and then never again sort of thing. But it struck me more as an accessibility feature rather than like a crucial gameplay feature. I was really interested to see the implications of how this sort of system could be implemented in other games. And hopefully this is something that caught enough attention and buzz to where other developers will do something like this. I could, for example, imagine like a Dark Souls being really interesting if there was something like, I know that fans of your FromSoft games like piecing that stuff together on their own, but like I missed the entire story of Bloodborne because I just didn't want to go through and actually like pay attention. So having a button to hit would be really useful in a game like that for someone like me who's maybe not as prone to piece things together organically.
I think that for RPGs with like, pages and pages of proper nouns, this should be a standard thing. I don't ever want to open up a Mass Effect codex ever again and like dive in for a specific thing, like pages deep into a menu. They just said a name in a cutscene. I want to pause the cutscene, check what that name is right there, integrate it into the game. This should be something that other developers take note of, I think.
It's the relevance of the information to what's currently happening.
Yeah.
That is the big breakthrough, right? Because like you said, the games have had this information stashed away for you somewhere if you need it. But having the most relevant information right there, a click away, that's the special thing that they accomplished.
I'm going to pivot us just a little bit. And, we promised to talk about some of the major story beats here. We've talked around and danced around the Eikon Battles. I would love to dive in and talk about some of these Eikon Battles because some of them are fantastic. And one of them in particular, I think, was incredibly disappointing.
Oh.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of which one. I mean,
Dave, do you want to play a game, Dave? On 3, do you want to say which one was the most disappointing?
Yeah. Sure. Can I join the game?
Yes,
Okay,
you can.
do it. Yes.
Okay. 1, 2, 3.
Titan.
Yeah, Odin.
What?
Oh, you said Titan. Okay.
Yeah.
So Dave and I agree. Flora, you said Titan.
What?
You said
the
Titan,
Hugo
right?
fight?
Yeah, the Hugo Kuka fight. Okay, why don't you go first and say why you're disappointed by that one?
The Hugo fight is way too long.
It's long.
It is.
Yeah.
It's
long.
like maybe 3 times longer than it should be. It like the emotional buildup is perfect, some of the cool set piecing things that happen in it are fantastic and over the top. Don't get me wrong, but then you just have more phases, and then like you're like, okay, all right, we're wrapping this. No, there's more phases, and so that's where the disappointment lies.
You know why I like that fight a lot is because I really like God of War on the PS2, and that
Yes.
really reminded me of a God of War fight when you're fighting Poseidon or something like that in those old God of War games. I was like, this is cool. I agree it's too long, but while I was thinking like, hey, can we wrap this up? I was also like, this is cool.
Exactly. I do
It was
recall a moment around 2/3 of the way through that fight where I was like, oh, we're still going, huh? But I didn't mind. Like, ultimately, I didn't care. And also, I feel like a big part of that fight that really that pushes you through that is that music change from that orchestral chanting, grandiose, and it goes to like this electro beat kind of new metal-y thing as you're running up its limbs. That was cool. I'm sorry. That's pretty sick. A cool moment. I was like, you're hitting me right in the I don't know what's.
And maybe for me, like my memory of it puts it in like the mid tier of Eikon fights because of the moment that happens after the fight where, spoilers, you literally cut off Hugo's hands.
Yeah.
Which, having never played a Final Fantasy game, I was like, that seemed kind of a stretch for them. Where like, cutting off appendages and having that character lose those appendages for a lot of the game didn't seem emblematic of a Final Fantasy game. Like, it seemed like that was really them, like, trying to push it and earn the M beyond the weird sex scenes that they had in the game.
Yep.
Yeah. Barnabas, very disappointing because it was built up and then it was really easy and didn't really have any stakes. I don't know if that was your feeling, Dave.
A couple things. I know that this is like I like this in theory. This is what I'm trying to say. I like in theory when you're not supposed to win a fight and you get into the fight and they just beat you. And it's not a classic like, oh, we do this fight, I destroy the boss, but then I lose in the cutscene afterwards. Instead, you get into the fight, if I remember right, and Barnabas just destroys you. You can't beat him. I like that. But I don't know. There's just something a little bit disappointing about that because I thought I was going to get an Eikon fight. And then when you do get the Eikon fight against Odin and Barnabas, you don't get to do the Ifrit versus Odin thing that you did for all the other Eikons, which is what was disappointing for me. Because like we talk about the ones we like. The one before this, you went up into outer space. And so I was really looking forward to like, okay, what's the escalation here going to be? Fighting against the biggest, baddest dominant that's left. But you don't. You fight in Clive form against him. You never get that Ifrit form escalation of spectacle that we mentioned before. This is I go through these peaks and valleys in this game where I'm like, that thing I just did, I love the fight against Titan. But then I have 8 hours of nothing. I have 8 hours of room temperature unflavored oatmeal after that. And then I get another I go up into space and I fight Bahamut, and it's the coolest thing I've ever done in a video game visually. And then I have this valley again after that, more oatmeal. And then I'm like, okay, I can't wait until I fight Odin. And it was just a big letdown. Yeah.
And look, there are moments within that Odin fight that are high points.
Yeah.
And I think at one point he essentially parts the sea, which I don't know if y'all felt that was very biblical. I was like, I see what you're doing here. We're moving towards killing God. We're going to part the sea. Okay.
Yeah.
And to your point, like I don't love in games where you have that moment where you can't beat the boss and like no matter what you do, you can't beat it and you're not meant to beat it. But it's the second phase was the disappointing one for me, where like you've gotten Jill's power, you go back, and essentially it's almost like he gives up to you at one point and just says like, oh, you are Mythos, I'm going to give you my power, and just sort of rolls over in a way that I was incredibly disappointed in, because that's like the second to last, that's the penultimate boss, and he's really put up as the most powerful of the icons, and just rolls over. Like, you have a harder fight with Garuda, which was easily my favorite.
It was fun.
I feel like what I would like to see happen, and this, I might give you two options here. Odin is so incredibly powerful in how he's framed. Like, the splitting the sea thing in half is like one great visual example of that. This fight would have been a nightmare, but it also could have been really, really cool if Odin had like a one-hit kill situation where you just game over and like you have to really go through a gauntlet to get to that final like human phase that exists currently in the fight. But actually what might be more RPG traditional is to have like a hidden icon fight where that's the case, where something's just like way, way, way tougher. But either way, it felt anticlimactic, I think is the word I would give this fight, after all of the cutscene build-up leading up to it.
I think the Garuda fight was fantastic, really, because it was early, and it was really like the biggest spectacle you got outside of that first fight we talked about earlier. And that one too felt very God of War-like, in that at one point I believe Garuda's like a large giant, essentially with claws kind of staring down at you on a pillar as you run around her claws, and I felt like that was really fun to do.
I like that fight a lot. It's like the one on the rooftop is the one that I remember the most. That feels like kind of like your first real boss fight. This was in the demo too. It was in like, they had like a separate mode in the demo where they were like, you played the beginning of the game, now we're going to let you play with like upgraded powers like you would later in the game and see what this combat's really all about. And they let you fight Garuda and Benedicta, and that was cool. I like that fight a lot, and doing it again for the second time when I actually got to that point in the story, I was like, oh, like I know this fight, but it's still fun. I like the attacks, I like the dodging out of the way, and I wasn't tired of the combat by that point. So yeah, good times.
We hinted at it a little bit when we talked about the fight with Odin with Barnabas, but between the two phases of the fight, that's when you take Jill's icon power. Did you feel like their love story was a believable one?
I mean,
or was it oatmeal? To Dave's point.
Okay. I mean, believable in what way? I believe that these two people who have known each other since childhood in this like horrible world are like, we love each other because you know, we've grown up together and we love each other, and like this love
trauma,
like a person to cling on to, and then they have this bond. I believe that. Do I believe like any moment, like we've said, Jill is underwritten, so as far as their communication with each other and like the moment to moment scenes with them two in it, did I believe it? Not really, but I believe that those two could have been in love. Like, I believe that those two would have this like incredible affection for each other. So I don't know. Yes and no, I guess.
I felt like the more interesting part in that space between Jill and Clive was when Jill gives up her powers to essentially, you know, power up Clive for later. The Joshua piece of that is actually more interesting because he just gets pissed off that, you know, he's essentially positioning himself as the savior of humanity and needed to take Jill's powers to do that, and was really upset about it. I think, is that the point where maybe he punches like Clive for essentially taking, you know, her icon power away? I thought that was the wrinkle that was more interesting, but their relationship, the voice acting between both was great, but the believability in the writing of the story just made the whole relationship feel very milquetoast.
I don't think that there was enough of a lead up to, or anything giving that moment any power. Like, all of a sudden she's like, oh, I give you my power. I'm like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Why are we? Yeah, we're naked on a beach and she's given him her ice power, and I'm like, this feels like an allegory, but I don't know. Like, what are we doing? Like, well, I didn't. It felt like they were trying to accomplish something and failing miserably in all accounts, because it felt like, there was not enough weight to the moment. It felt kind of weird, like I said, like it was trying to be an allegory in a weird way that I didn't really like. I don't know, like that the idea that she's like, oh, I'm giving my power to the man. It was strange, because it's more useful to him. But it makes sense within the story and who the characters are. But it just, I don't know, something about the presentation of it was just very strange to me.
I definitely felt like it came out of nowhere. It was awkwardly delivered, and it didn't quite do the fan service thing, like oh, they're naked on the beach, like, but it sort of like felt like that was originally where the idea came from. And the fact that I wasn't emotionally resonating with the relationship that was being shown to me, it was a disconnect scene for me. Visually very beautifully presented. But I don't know. I definitely felt out of place because online, when I saw people reacting to the Clive and Jill relationship, people were getting really, really excited about it. And I thought I had missed something. Like maybe this is a relic of not checking the active time lore, but I kind of was still under this, like, aren't they technically related thing? Is this another Game of Thrones ripoff elements? Like I didn't know what to make of it at first. And I just kind of just sat through the sea.
Yeah, I'm with you. It took me by surprise, and I've talked with other people, and they've mentioned like a will they, won't they type of thing with Clive and Jill throughout the story, and I was like, where did you see that? I didn't see any chemistry in that way between them leading up to that point. Now, there are people who say, and this is true, that given all that they've been through, that if they were to just decide to take comfort in each other in that way, then that makes sense. But I did not see any chemistry between them leading up to that point, other than the fact that they've known each other forever. And so it felt like a really jarring, like, we're in the party. There's so many scenes where, like, Clive is about to go do something dangerous, and they'll be like, all right, so we're ready. And Jill just goes, and nods her head. And that's all you get from Jill. And there's no, like, outward concern for Clive or anything like that. And then that thing with Joshua afterward, it felt like they had cut a scene before that.
Yeah.
Where, like,
I agree.
Because Joshua gets like real mad at Clive and it's like, you took this from her, you're making this about yourself and all this stuff. And it's like, dude, like that felt like a very consensual, like, you take this, it will do better for you. You are obviously like the chosen one in this scenario. I can help you help everybody by giving you my power. So here it is. And then Joshua's like, how dare you do that to her? I'm like, bro, like, you weren't there. Like, what is wrong with you right now?
I didn't know that Joshua cared in the slightest about what happened to Jill at any moment of the entire story. And then all of a sudden he's mad enough to punch his brother about it. Yeah, that was surprising. I never felt any thought of like, oh, will they or won't they? I was like, oh yeah, no, they're the couple of this entire game, this entire time. And I wasn't going like, oh, it was not Ross and Rachel here. Like, this is what it is. Like, this is a couple right here.
Yeah. Not Titus and Yuna, to give a Final Fantasy example.
Hey.
Yeah. Weird.
The one thing that I think is also puzzling about all of this is that when you get Shiva's powers, it's not like that actually gives some new dimension of gameplay to Clive. It's just another icon that you can choose to mix and match. I didn't think that the Shiva powers were like boring or uninteresting or unhelpful, but like it's not the transformative thing that the story and the cutscene suggests that it actually might be. Like once that scene's over, great. I get this new elemental attack that doesn't really like... Yeah. It doesn't like, break a new type of enemy, back to that whole elemental damage discussion.
It's one of 6.
Yeah.
Like any other.
Yeah.
Dave, you go first because I want to take us in a slightly different direction.
Okay. Yeah, I think that the thing about that transfer from Jill to Clive is that Clive took the other ones by force, basically. Clive took it from Benedicta and Hugo. Joshua blessed Clive when Joshua was a kid. Clive had the blessing of the Phoenix at the beginning of the game. This is the only time when a character like willfully gives it over to until Barnabas to Clive. So like there is that if you're really, really into the story to a point that I wasn't. I think that point is there that like Clive's taking all of these by force from these villains throughout the story, but this one is a, like, you know what, you take this type of thing. Do you find yourself playing older games and wishing that there were new discussions about those games? Enter Tales from the Backlog. Hi, I'm Dave Jackson, and on each episode, I'm joined by a guest to break down those games that may be stuck in your ever-expanding backlog. Each episode looks at one game in depth, focusing on mechanics, story, music, and other aspects with no spoilers until a clearly marked spoiler wall in the middle. If you've played the game, go ahead and climb that spoiler wall and enjoy in-depth story discussions, and if not, jump out when we warn you and maybe go play that game for yourself. We have over 100 episodes in the feed, everything from Disco Elysium to Tunic to discussion episodes about how to get into horror games, and if games actually need to be fun, or if they have more to offer. I guarantee that there's something in there for everybody. Once again, that's Tales from the Backlog, available wherever your podcasts are found.
We've talked here about, Shiva and some of the Eikon powers. The thing we haven't shared is what our final loadouts ended up being. So I'd love to know, maybe I'll start so y'all can think about it. But I ended up defaulting by the end, speaking of Shiva and Jill, I ended up using her power for a lot of the end of the game, really because, she had an area of effect power that I really enjoyed, and then had sort of an ice wall that she could bring up, so I used Shiva, and then I kept with my fire powers from the Phoenix for almost the entire game, and then ended up finding, because you can actually, once you've mastered a power, the thing that I didn't know until like hour 30 of the game is when you master a power, you can actually slot it into if you choose one icon, you can slot a different icon's ability into that icon slot. Mm-hmm. So essentially I would have Sid's electric power, but then had like Hugo Kupka's like big old punch. Katie, you look surprised.
I'm so annoyed. I'm not surprised. I'm annoyed. Of course.
Yeah, you can mix and match.
Of course you can. After you master one of the powers with the ability points that you don't quite get enough of, you get like 950 silk steals, but you don't get enough ability points to like be able to do as much as you want. Even if you like hyper concentrate on just the things that you want, it's still not enough. So of course, if you master them, you can do that. And
I actually
don't tell you.
I didn't put together that it required mastery of an ability for that to be the thing. I just figured out like 45 hours into my playthrough that, I never explored the menu. And then, I can put different elements together. Like, I don't think the game actually does a great job of communicating when that happens, whenever it opens up the ability. To get back to the loadout discussion, I really enjoyed pairing Titan abilities with everything. Like, just having a Titan ability on hand was always, it felt very safe for me. I strongly disliked the lightning icon's tendency when you hit circle to zoom in on the reticle. That always threw me off as like an accident in combat. And so I would take the lightning abilities and put those on the other icons that I was using in combat, like Ifrit or the Phoenix. That sort of like, I think the abilities of some of the secondary and tertiary icons that you get throughout the game are great. And then putting them on the primary ones that you get at the beginning of the game, that was where I felt most comfortable. Because like the Garuda ones, I didn't really love, but I did like that circle ability of like, whipping towards or grabbing an enemy or whatever.
Yep. I rocked with the Phoenix, the default Phoenix loadout. I rocked with the default Titan loadout. And then I had Garuda, because of that grab claw feels, I don't want to say essential, because like, again, the combat's it's not at that level, but it's really helpful to grab a stagger or a half staggered enemy and kind of whip them down a little bit. But then I put a couple of Odin's abilities on Garuda to replace one of them, and I kept Garuda's dodge ability because that does a bunch of stagger damage. But I didn't find Shiva's or Sid's or Ramu's abilities to be very useful at all. And I mostly, it was like, I'm going to do these other things situationally. Like if someone's staggered, I'll do that hook claw thing to pull him down. Or like if that dodge counter with Garuda is ready, then I will wait for the next attack to come and I'll use that. But the rest of it was just waiting for Titan's stuff to get the cooldowns to go down, because they just do a bunch of damage. And I think that every fight in this game is about like 30% too long. Regular enemies, boss fights, they're all pretty long. So I want to do as much damage as I can to hasten it along a little bit.
I rolled with Phoenix, Shiva, and Titan. My two favorite ones were the Phoenix Rises or something. It's a big area attack. When you master it, it's like 3 waves of just fire and it does a lot of damage. And then Shiva was good, and then Titan with the something of judgment, like Bolt of Judgment or something. When you upgrade that, it's like 2 big strikes that do quite a bit of damage. But yeah, I pretty much rolled with that almost the whole game.
I also used Bahamut because at a certain point, if I know I'm not fighting a boss, I'm pretty bored by the regular combat. So what I would do is I would put Bahamut on, and Bahamut has that Mega Flare attack where it charges, but you can't attack during it. So you just kind of like kite enemies around while it charges up to like level 6 or whatever. And then lightning comes from above and kills all of them. So I did that quite a bit just to feel something during those regular encounters.
One of you mentioned that the game doesn't really explain the combat system really well. I think they did a really poor job of explaining stagger damage because, as a new Final Fantasy fan, I was just like, and I don't even know if that's in other Final Fantasy games, but stagger damage, I didn't really understand it until 30 or 40 hours in to say like, oh, my attacks will do stagger damage that will, like, if I choose a certain like loadout or I use specific moves, I can actually stagger bosses faster and get my free hits in. So maybe another point that the combat should have been a little more deeply explained.
I'll agree they didn't explain enough that some things do more stagger damage than other things because, I didn't figure that out till pretty late in the game. But I do like the 2-part stagger system where halfway we'll just kind of interrupt them, whatever they're doing. So you go, oh, I'm this close to that midpoint stagger. So maybe you'll just kind of like try and get a couple more hits in to interrupt whatever they're doing. And then the full stagger where it leaves them just lying on the ground for a good, 10, 15 seconds. And you just hit them the whole time. It was fun. I kind of liked the stagger meter.
Switching gears, before we talk about the end of the game, I'd love to ask y'all if there's a specific moment that really comes to mind beyond some of the Eikon fights that we've had that you want to talk through.
This is bad. My first inclination was to say no, but one did come to mind, and it's the moment when this is really the only moment in the game where I really felt any connection with the story whatsoever. And it is the point when Clive, you've been following this hooded figure that, like, we know it's Joshua, right? But Clive doesn't. And then they reunite briefly, but then they have this big fight. It's the Bahamut fight. And then after that, finally, Clive and Joshua can reunite and they can give each other a hug. And the whole storyline to that point has been leading to this moment. And they reunite. It's a great scene. The emotion from the voice actors is fantastic. And then their mom is there too. And she kind of a little Game of Thrones analog here too. She had been doing all of this backstabbing and stuff because she thought that this is what she had to do because she thought that her good son was dead. But it turns out he wasn't. So she deals with that by just, instead of facing the consequences, what is it? The click the thumbsticks to accept the truth, right? Instead of her accepting the truth by clicking the thumbsticks, she just kills herself right then and there. And I thought that scene, the reuniting of Clive and Joshua was really great. After, like, again, they know that each other is there, but there's pressing stuff they have to do, and they can't have that moment. And then they finally do get to have that moment, and then their mom gets her comeuppance because all the way till the end, she was a terrible person.
Katie, are you going to talk about this moment in depth more?
No, I'm going to talk about a different moment.
Okay, I want to jump in because this is also another
Oh,
moment that I
go
love.
ahead.
This is probably outside of some of the Eikon fights, my favorite moment, because we hadn't said that essentially to keep her bloodline alive, she made nice with Sylvester Lesage, who was killed, and that's why Bahamut went crazy because Annabella is her name, I believe. Annabella Rossfield, which at that point would have been Annabella Lesage. She essentially maneuvered to keep her bloodline alive, had a son who essentially was a combination of her bloodline and Lesage's, who they were essentially positioning him as, the dominant for the family, and taking, Dion out through, a bunch of political machinations. But this part, Ben Starr's performance in this specific scene where he is yelling at Annabella, essentially unloading all of his baggage about how she's a terrible mother and, how, she essentially pushed him aside and gave him to the slave trade. In that moment, all I could think was, oh, this is how Ben Starr wins a game award this year. It's this specific scene that does it. And I'm sick for thinking that, but that's all I could think about.
It's a good scene.
Can I tell the story of meeting Ben Starr now? Can I do it?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. I was at PAX West, and friend of the show who's been on before, Cam, who was on our Walking Dead episodes, was sitting in the lobby of a hotel. I was meeting with someone else. I stood up, we were finishing our meeting, and he essentially just called me over, and I saw he was eating, Mexican food, and I was just like, oh, Cam just wants to chat and hang out. And so I go walk over, and he's standing, and there's someone sitting at a chair, and Cam just goes, oh, hey, Jacob, I want to introduce you to Ben. And I was like, okay, just a casual Ben Starr sitting there, who had clearly come for the 16 panel, and was tired because, I'm assuming they came from London. They were very tired. And so they were like, hey, great to meet you. Let's chat for a bit. And then I'm going to go and take a nap. The friend I was meeting with came, and again, Cam knows this person as well, so called her over. And she, same reaction. I think when I saw Ben, I was like, oh, I'm 27 hours into your game. You're great. Which I don't normally do the fan service thing, but I did in that moment. I was a little embarrassed, but I kept a lid on it. But the moment I actually want to talk about is that, the friend sat in a chair in the hotel and the chair broke. She is a small person, but it was just a chair that literally just the leg it was attached with a screw, came out and the chair broke. Ben Starr helped her up and then very casually got down on one knee and with no tools put this leg back together in a way that I don't even know how Ben Starr did it. With one swift movement, completely attached this screw again and let her sit, and then soon after that just went for a nap. And I'm like, who is this man? Why is he incredible? Why is he the most chivalrous? Why is he Clive Rossfield saving people with frickin' chairs in hotels in PAX West? I fell in love that day with Clive Rossfield.
I just have to say, and this isn't taking anything away from Ben Starr.
Don't take
in that
my
moment.
story. Don't
I'm
do
sure
it.
it was wonderful.
Don't do it.
I just have to say, Jacob was so
Don't do it.
captivated that he literally went, oh my God, he threaded a screw in with his hand. He's amazing.
Superhero.
That it was
you had to be there.
It was so perfect and charismatic that he was like, oh, he can do anything. He can thread a screw.
Literally. You weren't there. He did it
You're right.
He essentially moved his arm in a way and it just the screw locked back into place, and I was like, how did you do that? Do you have ether? Do you have magic? Is that how this happened? I finally told the story in a place, and now I can just keep it in my memories forever. Thank you all.
You're
Hi, Ben, if you're listening.
Katie, did you want to take us somewhere else?
So, yes, that was the other moment. Mainly, yes, Clive saying everything that he wanted to say and unloading it all. And the voice acting throughout this game, I think, is spectacular. Mm-hmm. The other moment that I was super interested in was when Dion confronts his family.
Yep.
Because there's his father who's leading the One Kingdom and
of Sanbreque.
Sandbreck, thank you, who is taking it more in a direction of the people of my country don't matter, and whatever. If it burns down, we'll build it up again. And if people die, then guess what? More will be born, and who cares? And Dion is very upset by this, thinking like, this isn't who I knew you to be, and this isn't the ruler that I knew you to be. And then for some reason, this small child is quote unquote king, Olivier, and it's all very strange. I didn't know where it was going. And every time we returned to this story, I thought, this is kind of interesting, but I don't really know what this is. The moment when Dion throws a javelin at Olivier, and then his father, I believe, unless I'm misremembering, his father like leaps in the way to catch the javelin instead, and then the small child ends up being Ultima, no?
Mm-hmm.
Ultima controls the child.
Yeah,
yes.
Ultima is controlling the child, and the child steps up, who this whole time has been completely uninterested in what's going on, and basically being like, can I have a toy? While they're like, this is our great ruler, and it's this little kid, and it's all very weird. And then this little child stands up and is like filled with malice and looking around and knows exactly what he's doing. And I don't know, it culminated in a way that I thought was interesting enough that up to then I was like, where is this going? And then it ended up being just a really cool scene.
Yeah, fans of Game of Thrones will know that's the Robin Aaron character. So when that came up, I was like, oh, okay, so this is just they watched Game of Thrones and we're like, we're going to make one of those.
And it was fun again. I liked it.
Ultima influenced Olivier Lesage in that case. Ultima's influence is sort of all over this game. I'd love to start taking us towards the conclusion and talk about the final boss battle and the way the story ends. Did we like the boss battle? Were we happy at the end? Did we feel like everything sort of wrapped up? I'm actually going to use a question from the audience that was from a Thunder Heart. They ask, were there any plot points you felt weren't resolved in a satisfactory way? So let's talk about all those things. Someone jump in and talk first. I'm still coming down from the Ben Starr story.
I don't know that I can point to anything that wasn't resolved in a satisfactory way because I wasn't that emotionally invested. Like I feel like the highs of this game are extremely high. And then the in-betweens are, for me, extremely low. And to that effect, I'm not waiting for the build-up to these moments. They happen, and I'm like, whoa, this is really impressive, really cool, well acted, beautiful, well scored, all that. But I'm not moment to moment going, oh my God, what's going to happen? I'm more just going, oh, what's the next cool thing that's going to happen? So I don't think I can really point to any storyline because I don't think that any of the storylines were that great, I guess. Like, as far as continually throughout the game, I don't think there was, that thread wasn't quite there.
Yeah, for me, there's the unresolved things for me are the things that they set up in the first half of the game and then kind of shoved to the side when Ultima really came front and center. So, like I said before, one of the things I really liked is how you are breaking the mother crystals and just continually making people's lives worse. You're setting out to help the bearers from their plight of slavery, but after you break the first mother crystal, you see some bearers that were freed and they're not very thankful for what you've done for them. And then you never really revisit that plot line ever again. And the plot line about, you break all the mother crystals, magic has left the world. People were relying on this to like do basic things like light fires and stuff like that. I wanted to see, after you beat Ultima and, conquer free will for the people of Valisthea, I wanted to see the direct result of what you did. I want to see the messy aftermath and I want to see the rebuilding process. But instead, you beat Ultima, Clive dies, and then it fast forward an unknown number of years when life is wonderful. But I don't know. I wanted to see how they get to that point. but you don't. You just see there is a world without magic. Magic is a fairy tale, which is a fantasy trope that I love, by the way. But you don't really see how they got to that point. It seems too neat, and it seems like they didn't really know how to get to that point. So they were just like, no, we're just going to skip ahead dozens of years or hundreds, who knows? And yeah.
I felt like with most characters, the resolution was satisfying enough for what this game was. But unfortunately, the lack of resolution that still bugs me is the higher level one. The overarching narrative just feels like it lost its way, as Dave was just saying. And I think that the things that made this game so compelling in the initial hours were the things that weren't delivered on thematically.
Yes.
And I mean that in the broadest of senses. Like I can't easily point to like, oh, this character, what the heck happened with them? There's some motivations I don't believe in. There's some conclusions that I find a little fussy, but throughout, like I don't see like there's a glaring thread that's just dangling, being blown through the wind. It's just unfortunate that the overall tapestry looks so unfinished by the end of the story, and it becomes such a trope, the kill God thing, which I support, but like when it comes to, I mean, like it's not Gurren Lagann. They're not throwing galaxies at each other, but it's pretty high level. But I was ready for the game to be over by that point.
Can I try and summarize what Ultima is, or how the whole thing happened? I'm gonna try and speedrun this just to see, because I didn't do any reading like about the plot and like say what does the ending actually mean. But I think what happened was Ultima was a god and said, we want to be more powerful, we want to ascend to a higher level. So to do that, we're going to essentially create humanity and distribute our power throughout the land and create these mother crystals. But then humanity got their own free will, and they needed to wait until an all-powerful being, Mythos, was created, who could be able to collect all of the power of humanity, then to deliver it to Ultima so they could ascend further. Is that the thing? Is that the plot?
I think so that Ultima could like take Clive's like vessel, so that Ultima could take Clive's body essentially, and
Clive
then
was a
have
vessel.
all that power.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's a story, I guess.
Bravo, Jacob. That's pretty good.
I'm shocked that I understood all of it, because there were parts in it that I was shocked by, but it was truly that, like, not that the mother crystals were like Ultima in essence, but that Ultima had essentially split his body into multiple parts, including parts. I
feel like you pushed it too far. Yeah. I feel like I feel like you had it, and then you're like, I'm gonna go one further, and I feel like you lost it. But also, I don't know if that's right.
Were there not multiple Ultimas, or that Ultima had split?
Yeah, there's that, but there's also the fact that Ultima is not a singular god. Ultima is one of many, and when they refer to Ultima, they refer to Ultima as
plural.
Them. Maybe because of a genderless pronoun thing, but also because there are many Ultimas just like Ultima. And whether it's, literally dozens of living things like Ultima, or if it's like a hive mind or something like that. I'm with Katie, though. I didn't care enough to ask those questions until right now.
I was shocked that that Joshua died. Not shocking. That Clive essentially died at the end of the game was shocking to me. Because that didn't feel very Final Fantasy to me. That felt like they let their hero die, and then just
at the end,
Jill and
after
Torgal?
the hero has done all the heroics and there's no more story to tell, then he dies. Like, I don't know. I once we got there, I was like, oh, he dies now. Yeah, like where else do we go? I guess.
And he uses the last of his power to set up a signal to Jill and Torgal to say like, "Yo, I died."
I suppose that's where that bearer's curse finally comes back after being one of the more interesting things that they introduced like 10 hours into the game.
Yes,
and then
I
for
completely
40
forgot
hours
about it.
it's gone, and then at the very end Clive's arm turns to stone, and I was like, "Oh, they didn't forget. It's still it obviously it doesn't matter to anyone else, but it's back."
They didn't forget. I did. And also that reminded me like, oh yeah, remember how interesting the start of this game was? Like it literally lit that fire. I was like, oh yeah, that was cool earlier. Why didn't we talk about that for the last 20 hours? Like, yeah, It was a cool thing that reminded me of how slightly disappointed I was.
So, question. We've punched this game until it's lost all of its stuffing, and I wonder if you cut out the side quests, like pretty much entirely. You trim maybe 10-15% of the story out of the major sections. Do we feel better about this game in that reality?
I
No.
like...
Kid? No, okay.
I generally think it is, if you put everything what this game is, and no exceptions, no cutting, no nothing, I think it's a okay to good game with like the highest of highs, but the lowest of lows. And I would have to recommend this game with a lot of caveats, basically, which makes it not a full recommendation. But like I said, the score is so good, the art is so good, the costumes, the voice acting, the opening setup of the world. I enjoy the combat, as kind of meaningless as it is, but I had fun with it. The Eikon Battles are fantastic. Like, there are so many things that are so good which almost makes it more disappointing that all these other parts are not living up to that. It's like, but you had something here, and then it just kind of lost its way. Something about the scale, like the scale of the game is too big, I think, and then they just didn't know how to put it together properly.
I also just want to briefly say that we haven't, as a collective, said anything denigrating about the performance or the technical aspects or like bugs appearing or anything. Like, this game was functionally flawless to me.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so like it felt polished as well. So that's another thing it's got going for it. But to reinforce sort of your final remark, I think that I'm a lot more critical of things that like demonstrate their potential, but then fail to live up to that demonstration like consistently. Like, that's my Last of Us 2 critique, largely, to plug Dave's episode once again. But I'll let Dave speak to this point.
Yeah, it's exactly what the two of you were just talking about. And I talked about this on the Tales from the Backlog episode about Final Fantasy XVI. When we were doing our wrap-up part, we, like all of us, were pretty critical of 16. And it's really easy to just play a game that sucks and has no ambition and is not trying to offer anything new. And just, you talk about it, you're like, yeah, this was garbage. I wasted my time playing this. I have nothing interesting to say about it. The reason that we have had a critical conversation, but a fruitful conversation about it, is because I think it's really close to being a game that offers a lot. It had a lot of potential with the story, and it abandoned. That's why when you said, had they cut out the side quests and trimmed the main story down, would you feel different? I don't think I would, because they would still be abandoning the interesting part of the story for something that, like I said, in the last couple of years, I've played 5 JRPGs that do the exact same thing with the story, but in a more cohesive way than 16 does. But the reason that we come up with these critiques is because the combat is good, but it's not great. The story sets up something really interesting, but then it leaves it behind for something that's not as interesting. And all of these ways that it approaches being a great game makes it really easy to find these critiques and have these conversations. Exactly like The Last of Us Part 2, like Flora said, Tales from the Backlog, whatever episode. Jacob knows the episode number.
I think it's 87.
78 and 84, I think.
Those are the two
that we did.
Yeah. It's those games that approach greatness. The games, and we want to like these games. Like, I'm a longtime fan of Final Fantasy. I wanted nothing more than to go to my Game of the Year season and be like, I loved Final Fantasy XVI. It's a return to form for a series that, in my opinion, hasn't had a good single-player game since the year 2000. I wanted to say those things. I'm not quite there, but that small gap is what inspires these really good critiques that we've laid out, I think.
Flora, you asked the question, if it was trimmed by 30%, would you love it more? And I think the answer for me is yes.
Yes.
But I have I have to admit that I have rose-colored glasses on because it is my first experience playing a mainline Final Fantasy game, and it's probably also like on one hand the amount of JRPGs that I have played. So I have not experienced the "you must kill God now" sort of trope that comes out in every single JRPG. So I was less unsurprised and dissatisfied by it. I loved the world. Sure, it was disappointing how some of the threads weren't explored, or the thing that made this story unique was sort of abandoned for the kill god trope. The combat, although simplistic at times, like the layers that they added in, was fun for me. And even though some of the side quests were junk, some of them made me cry. So, when I think about my Game of the Year list, this is on it. It's not at the top of it, but it's a very good game that is going to compel me to play more Final Fantasy games. Like immediately after this, I went and I looked at the list of the best Final Fantasy games, and like obviously your perennials, your 6s, 7s, and 8s are on there. 10 is on there too. And I was thinking like, cool, I'm gonna play 7 Remake now. So I don't know. I'm less conflicted than y'all. I loved it a lot. It has its issues, but I still loved it.
I just want to offer a quick correction. Final Fantasy X came out in 2001, so that was the last good mainline Final Fantasy game. Thank you, everybody.
We got a lot of questions from the community. I'm just going to pull one and then say thank you to everyone else who included questions. We will throw some of these out after the fact. But the last question that I want to ask is, would you like to see, and this comes from Lukewarm Lewis, would you like to see the series continue with more of an action focus or return to a more traditional battle system for future entries?
I think that Final Fantasy VII's more hybrid approach, the remake, is more interesting than the complete commitment that we see here in 16. I think if 16 had maybe more immediately customizable combat options and maybe a little more like weapon variation than what we spoke about, how it's just kind of a ticking up number and some of the less developed elements of the combat here, I might have a different opinion. But I like the blend that's going on in 7 Remake better than a traditional turn-based combat as well. Like I feel like we live now in an era of game design where many people have experienced Persona 5 Royal with all of the amazing enhancements to what turn-based combat can look like. And going back to something even as beloved as like a Chrono Trigger is anachronistic, to pardon the pun. When it comes to Final Fantasy, I don't really want to see it live fully in either camp, or if it does, that's just less interesting to me. So I'm going to say 7 Remake for those who have played. You get a little bit of both.
I would generally agree with that statement, that it's most interesting when you can kind of throw all these ingredients together and see what you get and see what kind of combination you can get. I would be okay with continuing what they did with 16 with the combat if you have more things that are meaningful as far as choices you make, weapon variation, as far as what they actually do. Also, the AI companions felt very just cosmetic, to be honest. Every now and then they would take out a minion, but other than that, I'm like, they're just kind of there. If you can command Torgal, but you can only have him do 2 things, like attack or kind of heal you sometimes. Other than that, like the AI companions just exist there. So it's like they're trying to make a action like a Platinum Games action game, but they're trying to have their cake and eat it too and have Final Fantasy elements, but they're not actually incorporating the Final Fantasy elements. So as it stands, this one, no, I don't want to see this one again. If we're growing on this, maybe. But yeah, I think I played a little bit of Final Fantasy VII Remake, like a few hours worth, and I really did enjoy the combat system there. I think something more towards that is preferable, but they could always build on what they did here and make it, improve it. But yeah, that's where I stand.
Yeah, I agree with what Flora said. The 7 Remake combat is fantastic. I love it. It's one of my favorites. Alongside 10, it's my favorite combat system in the entire series that I've played. But as far as this game goes, I agree with what Katie said. I don't want them to just do this again. I want some actual depth to the decisions that you're making. I want to see an enemy and recognize a weakness and exploit the weakness with the tools that I have. I want to make meaningful choices about what icons I'm using or whatever the equivalent is in the next game, rather than just this one's cooldowns are ready and the other ones are not, so therefore I'm going to use that one. I would like that. So to answer Luke's question, I don't care if they do another action game or another turn-based game or a hybrid. I don't care. I just want it to be good as far as the combat. I want it to be meaningful and engaging in a way that I didn't think this one is. And I want to just do a quick plug because a lot of people think that Stranger of Paradise, the one with Jack yelling about chaos, is like a meme game, but it secretly has an incredibly deep combat system. It's really, really good. And all of the things that we've been wishing that 16's combat did, Stranger of Paradise has all of those things. It's really, really good. So if you, like me, were let down by the combat system in 16 for not being deep or engaging enough, try Stranger of Paradise. It's got what you need. I also just want a real quick thing. We haven't addressed this, but this game got a bunch of heat from longtime Final Fantasy fans for abandoning turn-based combat, which, first of all, Final Fantasy X was the last turn-based game. It came out in 2001. Let's accept that the series has moved on. Mm-hmm. But I came out of this like feeling that this is like kind of Final Fantasy, kind of not, but it's because of all those missing RPG things. And the fact that it is, like someone said, I forget who, sorry, that they're just trying to have their cake and eat it too. Just doing a Platinum Games or Devil May Cry type thing, and then just being like, oh, we got to have you level up, I suppose. And we got to have you craft weapons, I suppose. So all of that stuff, like the 1 foot in and 1 foot out, doesn't quite work. I want them to commit and make a firm decision. I think this game sold pretty well. So relatively well. It sold okay. Maybe it didn't meet
I'm sure Square Enix didn't.
I was going to say, maybe it didn't meet Square Enix's amazing expectations for sales. But this game did well enough. There's going to be Final Fantasy XVII. And I hope that when we look back at 16, we'll be like, oh, it was a stepping stone along the way to a really good action Final Fantasy game. Because I'm a longtime fan of the series, but I don't care if they do action games. I want fun combat.
As of August 2023, it sold 3 million copies only on PS5. They release your game only on one system and then be disappointed about its sales. Way to go, business minds. Give me an MBA.
One quick
remark. Do you want mine?
Square Enix reported that they lost like a third of their company value because of Final Fantasy 16. That's like obviously not true, but they're blaming the fact that they've lost billions of dollars on this game's release.
They almost went bankrupt because of their experiment with Final Fantasy 15. So I also just want to say real quick, it's been a long time since Final Fantasy fans got a complete single-player game that didn't involve some multimedia experiment. So that's good. It's a step in the right direction.
Basically, the hope is that they will learn the right lessons. But based on what we literally just said, I'm not super hopeful that they're going to. We may not... The Stranger of Paradise... Like you said, you think has a great action gameplay and mechanics. Maybe we're not learning the right lessons from Stranger of Paradise. We're not integrating that into other things. We'll see. We'll see what they do.
I also wanted to see Jack in this game.
Our opinions are one. The press had an 88% Metacritic or OpenCritic average on this one. I pulled 2 reviews. I'll read them really quickly. GameSpot gave this 9 out of 10. Michael Hyam wrote, Final Fantasy XVI is a bold shift in both gameplay and narrative, yet captures the Final Fantasy magic in a stunning fashion, earning a place within the pantheon of incredible entries in the beloved franchise. You can hear Michael on our Hi-Fi Rush episode from earlier this year. And from Game Informer, Wes LeBlanc wrote, when I look back at my time with Clive, his friends, his enemies, and Balestia, it's those highs that I vividly remember. Final Fantasy XVI is very different from its predecessors, but in many ways very familiar, and it's still a Final Fantasy through and through, reminding me why I love the series so much. You can hear Wes on our Donut County episode. He gave it an 8.5 out of 10. Michael gave it a 9. So I'd love to thank the folks that sent in questions. We're not going to get to those questions. Bits of Time, Setobox, Matt Storm, Adam Gumbert, Link HS. Thank you for sending in questions.
Maybe we'll answer them in the Discord.
That's a great question. Katie, where's the Discord at?
Oh.
Plug a thing. Do it.
I'm not prepared to plug. You know I'm bad at plugging, Jacob.
Leftbehindgame.club/Discord is where you can find that that Discord. We're probably going to talk about this game a lot because we're doing a 2-part series and a lot of people have questions. So thank you for sending those in. We'll continue the conversation in that Discord. Dave, thank you so much for coming back to the show. We appreciate it. This is probably the longest record that we've ever done in the history of the Left Behind Game Club. So thank you for that. Tell us where you can be found on the internet.
Yeah, so again, I'm the host of the Tales from the Backlog podcast, where this recording that we've done is the average episode length of a Tales from the Backlog episode. So yeah, if you like long podcasts, in-depth analysis, I think that we've got you covered over there. Again, that show is backlog game reviews for the most part. I do new games, but the episodes will come out months after the release, so I'm never on the cutting edge of new releases. Again, every episode of my show is split in 2. There is a strict no spoiler section at the beginning where we basically do as much as we can of the analysis without spoiling. So you can listen to any episode of the show regardless of whether you've played a game or not. You will not be spoiled on key story things. That is my promise. And then after that spoiler wall, all bets are off, all spoilers. So for those who do want to stick around for that story breakdown, or in the case of some other games, like real shop talk type stuff, you can stay for that spoiler section. You can find that anywhere that you listen to podcasts, of course, unless you're listening on some secret Left Behind Game Club thing that I don't even know about. Could be. I don't know. But you can find it anywhere. You can also find me on whatever social media. You can just search Tales from the Backlog. You'll find me. And you'll also find me in the Left Behind Game Club Discord server. It's a good time.
Dave, thank you so much for coming.
Of course. Thank you for the invite.
Yes.
Of course. You can find all things Left Behind Game Club, a couple places on Twitter at Left Behind Club, in our Discord, which you've already said. And if you like this podcast, if you literally made it this far and you haven't turned it off yet and you haven't given us a 5-star review on your podcasting platform of choice, shame on you. Actually, we love you, but it'd be great if you could juice the algorithm a little bit for us and maybe more folks will hear the show. You can find me at all places at Jacob McCourt, JACOBMCCOURT. I'm on Twitter. I will not call it X. I'm on Instagram. I'm in the Discord. And then I host another show called Crossplay Conversations with Luke Lewis and Joseph Hooper. We are approaching Game of the Year time. We do our show in January. So if you want to chill for the holidays and then grab a Game of the Year show, we've got a big one coming in January. So look for that. Crossplay Conversations on all major podcasting platforms. Katie, where can you be found?
I'm on Twitter. I'm Lesperak, Lesperak. The end.
Flora, before you turn into a pumpkin, where can you be found on the internet?
I am on Twitter at LudoNarrativeFM. I'm on epiloguegaming.com, where I actually posted a more in-depth article on Final Fantasy XVI if you want to know a little bit more about my thoughts.
Celestmas, coming up.
Hey.
Tell us about that briefly.
Oh my goodness, it's awkward. We didn't talk about this beforehand, but I'm flying back home, so I won't be able to do Celestmas. I'll have to do New Year's Eve Celestmas again.
Okay.
So if you want to leave this part in the episode, the idea would be that New Year's Eve, I will be playing a straight-through playthrough of Celeste Traditionally, I've done this on New Year's Eve for people who like maybe don't have a great relationship with their family or whatever. It's like a nice little social occasion to kind of tide us through what otherwise could be a difficult evening. But last year, for various reasons, I was unable to do it on Christmas Eve. This year, same thing. So New Year's Eve, I think. Celeste is coming either way. It's a tradition.
And where are you on Twitch for that?
Oh, goodness. It's twitch.tv/Flora Marigold, and that's MERIGOLD.
Awesome. That's the end of our show. As always, shout out Mike Ruffalo, and that, my friends, is one less game left behind.
Video games are a unique medium.
They can tell stories,
Immerse us in strange, fantastic worlds.
blur the very boundaries of our reality.
But at the end of the day, video games are fun. Whatever fun is to you.
I'm Jeff Moonen,
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
and on Fun and Games, we talk about the history, trends, and community of video games.
It's a celebration of all the games we play and all the fun we find within them.
And there's so many more games out there, so we hope you'll share in that conversation with us.
Fun and Games podcast with Matt and Jeff. Find us on certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And happy gaming.
Do you feel like you're the only person in your circle who wants to go deep about video games regularly?
We were like that too. Until now.
Welcome to Crossplay Conversations, the brand new bi-weekly topical video game podcast from Luke Lewis,
Joseph Hooper,
And Jacob McCord.
with many years of breaking it down separately on shows like the Left Behind Game Club, Player Podcast, and Lukewarm Games, the gang is finally coming together to publish their gaming group chat in audio form every other week.
Expect roundtable reviews of the latest games, profiles of upcoming indies, and insightful conversations about essential topics in the video game industry. All with a mostly positive, insightful, and fun style.
Crossplay Conversations debuts on August 1st with brand new episodes hitting every other Tuesday. Help us out by subscribing on your podcast platform of choice to get the first episodes delivered straight to your feed.
And follow us on Twitter at Crossplay Convos for updates about the show.
Cheers and happy gaming.